Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Yevamot, Kuf Hey. We're getting close to the Siyum. The Siyum, I'll already tell you the date. The invitation will go out soon on July 10th. Is that the 10th, right? It's on a Sunday. We're going to do it on a Sunday. The Siyum, it actually ends on July 7th, but we're going to push it off to Sunday to make it more manageable for people, at least people abroad whose Sunday is not a work day. We're going to have a good program, very interesting, will be coming out within the next few days. And for those in Israel, there'll be siyums around Israel on Thursday night, the 7th. And as usual, if any group who wants to arrange a siyum within their area is invited to do that. And all the details will be going out about those as time goes on within the next week. Okay. We're going to get started. Let's refresh our memory a little bit about yesterday's daf. First, I'll read the dedication. This week's learning is sponsored by Judy and Zev Berman for the refuah shlema of our sister-in-law, Phyllis Hecht. Please say Tehillim for Gittel, Pesha, Bat, Masha, Rachel. May she have a complete recovery, and may we all share b'savot tovot. We're all thinking of you, Phyllis. Okay, we're going to get started now with where we ended yesterday. We have this shalchu le'lavua de Shmuel. That means the rabbi sent to the father of Shmuel the following halacha. So what we're going to see here today is what they sent him. We had a bit of a discussion about it yesterday. We're going to continue the discussion. Then we're going to bring a different version of what they sent him, even though in the end, part of the bottom line is very similar. And then we're going to have a story. And within that, we're going to see another halacha that they sent him. Okay, which is just a different halacha, not a different version. We're going to have a lot of stories today, stories within stories and all that. So be prepared. They're not exactly the most sensational stories that we found in the Gemara before, but there are a bunch of stories, and one story in particular toward the end of the daf, which is very interesting. So going back to yesterday's daf, about 15 lines from the bottom, they sent him the following halacha. I'll just go back to the basics. Yevama. If you remember, the Mishnah had a whole discussion. Which parts are critical elements of the ceremony? Chalitza, everyone agreed, is. The recitations, everyone agreed, is not. Recitations, we're going to see tomorrow what they are. And the spitting, there was a machloket about it. Rabbi Eliezer said it's a critical part, and Rabbi Akiva said it's not a critical part. So this now says that if she spits, and only spits, doesn't do chalitza or anything else, then tachlot. That means going forward, she does chalitza, she can't do yibum. She basically, by doing the spitting, it precludes her from being able to do yibum, to which the Gemara tried to figure out. This basically means if forbidden to the brothers. Remember, we learned that once you do chalitza, she's forbidden to the other brothers. We had a big machloket about this a while back. She's forbidden to that brother who did chalitza. She certainly can't do yibum with him because asher lo yivnet, because he didn't build his brother's house. He no longer can do it anymore. To the other brothers, there's a debate whether it's lo yivnet, shelo taseh, or whether she just reverts back to being the brother's wife and is forbidden karet. Right? It's a matter of what the intensity of the isser is, how severe it is. Either way, she's forbidden. So in this case, she didn't actually do chalitza, but she did the spitting. That was enough to disqualify her to all the brothers. Now, they said it can't be Rabbi Akiva because he doesn't view Rakika as significant at all. So therefore, right, it's not essential. Therefore, it shouldn't really have any meaning. It can't be Rabbi Eliezer because he requires, even though he thinks Rakika is significant in and of itself, but it's only significant with its count, with the chalitza. If you don't do it with chalitza, he has this whole approach in general that one thing without the other is not really important. So it must be Rebbe who holds that one thing without the other could have significance. That's where we ended yesterday with the kibsei atzeret, where you did the shchita with the right intent, but the zrika, the sprinkling of the blood, not with the right intent. That's enough to basically say, at least lechumra, from a stringent perspective, we're going to be strict with the bread and assume the bread is sanctified, even though it's not fully sanctified and you can't eat it. But yes, it is sanctified. So that's where we ended. Now we're going to say, Umi amar Rabbi Akiva, Rikika lo pasla. Wait a minute. Our assumption was that Rabbi Akiva, since he doesn't think spitting is an essential part of the ceremony, therefore, he certainly wouldn't think that spitting alone would disqualify her to do yibum with the other brothers. Is that really true? Now we're going to read a braita, and it's going to be a few-step process. We're going to have to show from this braita, number one, we're going to have to attribute it to Rabbi Akiva. Otherwise, it's irrelevant to our purposes, right? Our purposes are to show that Rabbi Akiva thinks that spitting disqualifies her to the brothers. So the first thing is to show it's Rabbi Akiva. The second thing is to show that it actually means here that if she spits, she's disqualified to the brothers. So that's the steps we're going to have to go through. So first, we're going to read the braita. Then we're going to attribute it to Rabbi Akiva. We're going to say it can't be anybody else. It must be him. Then we're going to explain that when it says a certain word, what it means really is she's disqualified to the brothers. So here's the bright. Chalza velo rakika velo kara chalitza takshera. It's a lot of complicated words, but if you just say it very simply, if she did chalitza and nothing else, she took off a shoe and that was it. Okay, she didn't do the spitting, she didn't do the reading. Chalitza takshera. Okay, her chalitza works. Okay, now who does that seem to match? That seems to match, right? The chalitza alone is enough. The rakika isn't essential. That's Rabbi Akiva. Okay, we'll get there in a minute. This is why I said maybe the first one didn't sound so complicated, but we're going to keep having, you did one and not the others. Okay, so you only did rakika, she only spat at him, but lo chalza v'lo kara, she didn't do chalitza, she didn't do the recitation. Chalitza ta psula, her chalitza is disqualified. Now this is a word we're going to have to qualify soon. If she only did the recitation, or also he recites, then ein kan beit michush. There is no significance whatsoever to this action. Now you can already see where this is going, because there's chalitza only, that works. There's, well, let's go to the other extreme. Recitation only, that's meaningless. And then there's this middle position, which isn't exactly clear. She spits at him. Now, the chalitza is disqualified. Now, the way we've been understanding chalitza ta psula until now is it's no good. And it's as if she did nothing. But it can't be as if she did nothing, because then it wouldn't have said in the third situation, ein kan beit michush. There's nothing, no significance whatsoever. So there must be some significance to the rikika, even though her chalitza is still disqualified. So first, again, as I said, the first thing we're going to do is figure out who's the author of this braita. Mane, according to who is this written? It can't possibly be. The first one was she did chalitza. She didn't do anything else. Rabbi Eliezer already said that rikika is what we call ma'akev. It's an essential part. There's no chalitza without it. So it can't be it's Rabbi Eliezer. Ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer. And here they remind us of his proof text. Kacha yaseh la'ish asher lo yivneh beit achiv, right? This is what we do to him, which they learn from here. They darshan davar shehu ma'aseh ma'akev. Anything that's an action rather than a recitation is essential. Spitting is an action, therefore it's no good. Therefore, this can't be Rabbi Eliezer. So ela pshita Rabbi Akiva. If it's not Rabbi Eliezer, it must be Rabbi Akiva. They're the two who argue here. So now, v'katane. And now we have to prove that when it says rakika v'lo chalza v'lo kara, she only spat and didn't do chalitza, or right, the taking off the shoe, or the recitation, chalitza ta psula. Now, chalitza ta psula can't mean she didn't do anything. Gemara doesn't say this, but it's obvious. Can't mean there's no significance whatsoever, because if there's no significance whatsoever, well, they would have said ein kan beit michush, or they would have said chalitza ta psula both in that case and in the next case. The fact that they distinguish means there must be something else here. So they understand the word chalitza ta psula, and later we're going to actually reread this into the Mishnah, and then later in a different case in the Mishnah. Chalitza ta psula means the chalitza disqualified her to somebody else, to which the Gemara says, right, even though it's not exactly the correct grammar for that. Psula means, right, psula seems to be defined in the chalitza itself is disqualified. But what they take it to mean, because again, in this braita, it certainly can't mean it's no good, because that's the third one is no good. And it says, ein kan beit michush, right? There is no significance whatsoever. So it must mean chalitza disqualifies her. Okay, so now disqualifies her to who? Leman. To who is she disqualified? If you want to say she's now forbidden to marry anybody in the world, well, pshita, mihavya chalitza dishtaria la'alma. Clearly, nobody thinks that spitting alone is the fulfillment of the mitzvah of chalitza. What does chalitza do? It permits her to marry anyone she wants. So to say this chalitza forbids her, well, we know it forbids her. Whoever would have thought that it permitted her? She didn't take off a shoe. The whole idea is you have to take off a shoe. So for sure, that's not what it means. And therefore, it's true she's disqualified to everyone, but she was disqualified to everyone before she spat into the shoe. And there was no reason to think, I'm sorry, not into the shoe, before she spat in front of him. There would be no reason to think that would have resolved her marital status, right? Her status to be able to marry. So therefore, it must be that she's disqualified to the brothers, And now what have we done? We basically proven, it was really raised as a question, but at the end, this is the answer, that in fact, you could explain the statement made to the father of Shmuel, that a woman who's supposed to do chalitza, who spits in front of one of the yabam, she is now disqualified to do yibum with any of the brothers, okay? Even Rabbi Akiva will hold that, even though, right, Rabbi Akiva, and now we're going to have to figure this out, even though Rabbi Akiva thinks that rikika, spitting, is not an essential part of the ceremony, if she does only that, it disqualifies her to do the mitzvah of yibum with the brothers. It's as if she did some sort of chalitza, it seems like. To which the Gemara is going to say, wait a minute. Rabbi Akiva, ma'ashna rikika, ma'ashna kriya. He thinks that kriya is not an essential part, the recitation, and he thinks that the spitting is not an essential part. So why, if she just does the recitation and she says some of the words, which we'll see in tomorrow's daf, what she's supposed to say, even though we've already read it in the Torah, but we'll see it again. If she says some of the recitation or all of the recitation, it doesn't mean anything. But if she does the spitting, it actually disqualifies her to the brothers. Why? So they explain. This is really all gzera de Rabbanan, as we say. It's an ordinance of the rabbis to prevent misunderstanding. Now, why? Kriya, what's the difference between kriya and the spitting? Kriya, de'ita ben b'tchila ben b'sof. As we'll see tomorrow in the Mishnah, there's part of the recitation you say before the tekas chalitza, before she does the taking off the shoe and the spitting. And part of it is done at the end of the ceremony, after. So since some happens before and some happens after, lo michlaf alei, it won't cause confusion. Now, we don't exactly know what the confusion is, but we'll see in a moment what it is. Even though it doesn't say so inside, but it'll be more clear when we see what would cause confusion. Often when they say, this won't cause a problem, but you have to see what would cause the problem to understand why this wouldn't cause the same problem. Rikika, it's just what I'm telling you are tactics when you're learning Gemara. Sometimes you don't understand something when you get to the first part of it. So sometimes you continue to the second part, and that helps make sense out of the first part. So rikika de bitchila leta ulevasof ita. The rikika, the traditional chalitza ceremony, is always done after she takes off the shoe. So because it always happens after, as opposed to the recitation, which part happens before and part happens after, what will happen? People will see her that she spit, and then they'll think that maybe we just missed the first part. We came late. Maybe we showed up late, and maybe she already did chalitza. Now, if we say, in this case, she didn't do chalitza, okay? She didn't take off the shoe, but she spat. She spat in front of him. And then what do I see? So I see that she spat. I didn't see that she didn't do chalitza, but who knows, right? Now, I see that if we say that she's not disqualified to the brothers, because according to Rabbi Akiva, it's irrelevant that she spat without chalitza, because that's not an important part of the ceremony. If we'd say she can now go marry one of the brothers, if she wants, she could do yibum with him or with any one of the brothers, I would think mistakenly that maybe chalitza was performed with this brother, and I'll see that they permitted her to marry a different brother, and I'll think that if one does chalitza, afterwards they're allowed to do yibum with one of the brothers, which is clearly forbidden. So we're worried that I might come to a mistaken conclusion, since the spitting always happens at the end. And therefore, it's only going to be a problem with the spitting, and it won't be a problem with the recitation. Because if I see she said some words to him, mumbled some words, and it was some part of the tekas of the chalitza, but I didn't see anything else, I'll assume, well, I saw this and I waited around and I didn't see that she did the chalitza. I'll know the chalitza wasn't performed. So I won't mistakenly think that she actually did chalitza and therefore is now marrying one of the brothers and that that's permitted. So it's all a concern of what people might think. And that's why, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's not really halacha. It's just that the rabbi said we should avoid this situation so that we don't cause confusion to other people, and people will mistake in the halacha and think that a woman can do yibum with one of the brothers after she did chalitza with the other brother. So that was all. So again, what did we do so far? We said that the statement that was said to the father of Shmuel about once she does rikika, she's forbidden to the brothers, can be explained according to Rabbi Akiva as well. And then we showed how it can be explained according to Rabbi Akiva, and we explained why Rabbi Akiva would hold this way. Next, Ikeda Amre, second version of what was said to the father of Shmuel. This is what they sent to him. If she already spit, but she did it before in the wrong order. What do we tell her? Or she just did it randomly. We tell her, okay, now do chalitza, take off his shoe, and you're done. You don't have to spit again in front of him. So now the Gemara says, how do we know this? Oh, we'll tell you a story. Okay, like I said, there'll be a bunch of stories today. Some are just more, okay, this is what happened, and some are more elaborate stories. A woman came in front of Rabbi Ami. Havayativ Rabbi Abba bar Mama Kameh. Rabbi Abba bar Mama was sitting in front of him when he did this. Okay, each of these stories, or most of them, have a little additional element to them, okay? Where it's not just a story, but you see a bit of the personalities of the people and some other elements as well. So Rabbi Abba bar Mama is watching Rabbi Ami. Okay, there was a case where this woman spat before she did chalitza. Amarle Rabbi Ami, chalotzla v'shari la tigra. Do chalitza and be done with it, meaning have her take off the shoe and you're free to go. Okay, the woman is done. So now they say, Amarle Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba says to him, what are you doing? But she needs to spit. He says she already did it. So Rabbi Abba says, let her spit again. What's the big deal? Now, I know you're all thinking that is a big deal, right? We don't want, okay, and we'll talk about this later. They don't really address the emotions of the woman, of the man. The whole spitting is really very humiliating to him, to her, right? She has to spit. He has to be there while she's spitting right in front of him. It's very humiliating and demeaning. I mean, we think often of the woman, but actually it's more demeaning to the man to have someone spit in your face. And why does she spit? Presumably because we're trying to punish this man to a certain extent and say, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, which is actually ironic because nowadays, and even in the time of the Gemara, we saw that people preferred chalitza to yibum, right? We don't want yibum to happen anymore. Now, it's maybe because we're in a less ideal world or things are different, or I don't know that we're in a less ideal world, but in other words, from the perspective of the Torah, yibum is the ideal, but for various reasons, better off not to do this, right? We had that people marry her for the wrong reasons, or, sometimes they don't get along with each other, or maybe he's too old and she's too young, or the reverse, or right, all sorts of reasons, or maybe he's got another wife and we don't really want people having more than one wife. All sorts of reasons why yibum is less than ideal, but definitely in the Torah times, it seems like yibum was the ideal, and chalitza was meant as a ceremony to say you're not doing what your obligation to your family is, right? You can imagine in a society very family-oriented, right? You're not doing your obligation to your family. This is serious. You deserve to be spit in front, right? But for her, it's also very demeaning as well to have to spit in front of somebody's face. It's very, okay. So this question is actually an interesting one. Oh, what's the big deal, right? Now, it is a big deal. Okay, but they answer from a different perspective, but I'm not sure that they don't think that that's also an issue. They just don't say it explicitly. Anyway, if you want to hear also more about the chalitza ceremony, Hebrews go Dafne Shalahen talk this week specifically about all the different halachot. Many of them comes directly from our Gemara. Some of them are, things that came up a little bit later, but anyway, it's interesting to hear. So now, why not just spit again? Okay, now, what's the issue? Why would you spit again? Because again, there's an order to the ceremony. Okay, so better to do it in the order it's supposed to be. So what if she already spatted him before? So which the Gemara asks, to which Rabbi Ami answers him, well, nafet mine chorba. Well, chorba is very serious. Chorba is, like a chorban, destruction. Destructive things can happen if we allow this spitting. So what is he getting at? Well, if we have her, now this is going to come full circle to where we started. This is the second version of Rabbi, if you remember, we're in the second version of what they said to the father of Shmuel. The first version was, if she spits, she's now forbidden to the brothers. The second version was, if she spits, we don't make her spit again. We just make her take off the shoe, and then she's done. But it's going to come full circle back to the beginning, which is, if we make her spit again, what is it going to look like? Again, it's more worried about what people will infer mistakenly. People will say, obviously her first spitting wasn't significant at all. And the next time a woman spits without doing chalitza, they'll say, there was no significance to that action, in which case what might happen? They might think that she can go marry one of the brothers, and that's not the case. So you might accidentally permit a woman who chalitza was done to her, even though it's only partial chalitza, right? But the spitting part was done to her, she did, and you might think that she can marry one of the brothers. but she can't. And therefore, we don't want to show that this first spitting was totally meaningless. And that's why we don't make her spit a second time, to show that the first spitting actually was meaningful, so that the next time something like this happens, basically we're going to permit her to, we might accidentally permit her to the brother. So we want to make sure we won't. That's why we don't make her spit a second time. To which Rabbi Abba Bar Mama is still not satisfied. He says, but there's an order, right? He's very frustrated. I don't understand this act. It's very clearly delineated in the Torah how it's supposed to be. And, where halacha is very organized and orderly to a certain extent. And, there's an order to things. Why are you doing it out of order? So he says, Kesidron lo ma'ap, that it's not essential. Okay. Yes, it's important to do things in order, but when there's other considerations, right, we don't really care. So not that we don't care, but we care more about the ramifications that might happen if we do make her spit again. So now here's like an interesting element of the story. Who is Savar? Rabbi Abba is standing there now. All his questions were basically, knocked aside, and he's feeling a little bad about it. He says, "Who Savar dichuye kamadchne?" He thought that maybe Rabbi Ami was just making up answers, that, oh, well, this, in the end, well, what about the order? The order's not that important. So he thought he was just pushing him off and just saying it. And he didn't really believe it. But so what did he do? Well, there's different ways you can respond when you don't believe what you're being told. So nafik dak be'eshkach. He took the respectful manner. Instead of saying, I think you're just making that up, he went and looked into and researched himself. Ve'eshkach. Eshkach means he found actually a breita that says this. So in his research, he came across this breita. Titania, bein shiktim chalitza l'rikika, bein shiktim rikika l'chalitza, masha asasu. Okay, it doesn't matter what order you do it. In the end, as long as you do all the actions, it's valid. So there, in the end, he validates the opinion of Rabbi Ami. Next story. Levi nafak l'kriyata. So Levi goes out to the villages, and Ba'omine, they ask him a bunch of questions, 3 questions. Number 1, Gidemet ma'oshet tachlot. A woman without arms, can she do chalitza? Why? Why would that be significant? Well, she has to take off the shoe. She can't take off the shoe without hands. Well, she could, and that's the whole thing. What if she uses her teeth? Does that work, or does she need to have hands? Yevama shakika dama. She's supposed to spit. Now we assume, what is she spitting? Saliva. What if she spits and blood comes out? Is that valid? Next, 3rd question, seemingly unrelated. You can think about maybe there's some connection. It's a pasuk from Daniel, chapter 10, verse 21. I will tell you what it says in the writing of truth. As if like they were talking about the word of God, basically, and it's the writing of truth. So they ask him, is there writing that's not of truth of God? Like, what do you mean? God always speaks the truth. Lo hava biyadi. Levi did not know how to answer any of these questions. So what does everyone do when they don't know the answer? They go to the beit midrash and they go to find answers to their questions. So we go, let's into the beit midrash. Amrle, they say to him, number 1, mikti v'chalza biyad, never says she needs to do chalitza with her hands. So anyway, she takes off the shoe. It doesn't really matter. Umikti v'yarkarok, it never says she has to spit saliva. So sure, dam works. That question, well, lo kasha, not difficult. When God decrees something and swears, he won't change his mind. When God decrees something and doesn't swear, that could be a katav she'eno shalamet. It doesn't mean God was lying, but God could undo it. Now, because we're on this topic, we're going to get a little bit off topic into topics about teshuva, and in fact, see a sugya that we already saw in Masechet Rosh Hashana. Rav Shmuel bar Ami, Rav Shmuel bar Ami, Rabbi Yonatan, Ligzardin, Sheyesh Moshua She'eno Mitkaveh. God promises something that will never be torn, meaning, right, he makes a decree, he won't tear it, he won't undo it. Says, I swear that the house of Eli, this was in Sefer Shmuel when they got punished for abusing their power in the temple, that, and notice their punishment is appropriate, they will never be able to be atoned with sacrifices forever. So Rabba says, wait a minute. Now, it's true, God decreed this, and it will be true forever. But he says we're going to be this is a very halachic way of looking at it, or a typical Gemara way. Okay, it says you will never be atoned for through sacrifices. But you can learn Torah, and that can atone for you. We can find alternative methods. Abaye Amal, he adds to this, you can also do acts of chesed, and that will help you atone if you're from Beit Eli. Okay, one of the punishments, we'll see this down in another minute or two, the punishment was that they were all going to die young, and forever, really. So how do you basically undo this? You learn Torah and you do gemilut chasadim. So Rabba v'Abaye nigabeit Eli ka'atu. Interesting that the ones, right, where there's a will, there's a way. Right? They wanted to find a way out. So each one came up with another reason how you can get out of it. Rabbi da'asak b'Torah chaya arba'in shnim. He lived 40 years, which was considered to be a good thing, especially coming from Beit Eli, which we'll see in a minute, that some people were dying at age 18. He lived to 40 years because he learned Torah. Abaye da'asak b'Torah ub'gemilut chasadim. He did both. Chaya shitin shnim. Basically, they each got an extra 20 years for each thing that they did. So he ended up outliving Rabbah because of that. Again, whether this is exactly true or they're just trying to make a point is a good question. Tanu Rabbanit, another braita about this. There was a family in Jerusalem. They would all die at age 18. Go to them and say, all our family is dying very young. Amar lahem shema mimishpachat Eli atem. Maybe you're from his family. Shenemar b'chomer b'beitcha yamut anashim. All the people in your family or the majority of your family are going to die anashim. What does it mean they die as men? They're going to die when they get to the age of being called a man. Go learn Torah, and that will give you life. They called their whole family the family of Yochanan. Yes, we did see this before. I didn't check where this sugya came from, but we definitely saw this sugya before. You can look at the Masarat Hashas. Okay. Amarav Shmuel bar Unya Amarav. Not only did we see this sugya also, but this is a very famous sugya. It's always quoted when you learn before the Yamim Noraim, all sorts of things. So how do you know that a decree for the community is never sealed and done for good? You can always undo it. So the Gemara first says, what do you mean? Eino nechtam, it's not sealed. What do you mean? It says in the Pasuk, Ki'im techabsi b'netel v'tarbilach bolit. If you wash it out with all sorts of detergents, right? This is a metaphor. Nichtam avonech lefanai. There's not the same nichtam. This is with a kaf, but it means nichtam. You will have a ketem, which means a stain. You will be stained forever. Okay, meaning there's nothing to do about it. It's not going away. So, which sounds the same as nichtam. It's sealed. Ela minayin she'afilu nichtam mitkarea. What it means is, if it's sealed, it could be sealed, but the seal can be torn. How do we know this? Who is like God, who listens to us whenever we call to him. So that means basically God can change any evil decree that he issues. But wait a minute. How could you say God is here anytime we call him? It says somewhere else, God is only there when he can be found, as if there's only a certain time he can be found. This is very famous. An individual can only beseech God when God can be found. Doesn't mean you shouldn't pray to God otherwise, but there's a time of year where God is more there for individual prayer, as opposed to the community, which is always there for prayer. That's why people gather for tefillot, right? It's why we daven b'tzibur. It's why when, apropos Phyllis, right, people gather for Tehillim together for this kind of thing. So they say, Yachid Emat. So when is this special time, Bihi Matzo, right? Important to know. The answer, this is the source for what we call Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance between Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. That's the time. Now, back to our topic, okay? Right, this was the section I was talking about that we already saw. Now, back to our topic. So again, why we're talking about tshuva in the middle of this is a good question. Maybe because they feel like the person who does, the man who's involved in chalitza maybe needs to do some tshuva for not doing what he was supposed to do. I don't know. But anyway, it's interesting to think about why the tshuva is mentioned here. Now another thing they sent to the father of Shmuel. A different reason why dam, not just because it doesn't say saliva in the pasuk, but because all blood is mixed with saliva. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, the Gemara says, wait a minute. There's difficulty from a Tanaitic source. Now, one thing you have to know about a zav, I'll just do this very quickly. A zav, any saliva or liquids that come out of his body are also tameh. But we're going to learn that it's only clear liquids and not blood. So, blood that comes out of his mouth or from his private part would be impure. Talmud Lomar, zovo tameh. It's only zovo, which is clear and not blood. And that kind of stuff that comes out, blood is not going to be impure. It actually has the status of an avatuma, the liquids that come out of his mouth. We'll talk about those in other times. So the Gemara answers, right? So that seems to indicate there is no saliva in it, because if there was saliva, the saliva of him is mitame. So it is tameh itself and passes on impurity. So if the blood was mixed with saliva, then the blood should be impure as well. To which the answer, lo kasha kambim motzetzet, by us, it's when the blood was in her mouth and she kind of leaves it in there a little bit, and then it comes out, and then it has saliva. Kamda shotek, but if someone's gushing blood, in that blood, there's no saliva. Okay, very pleasant things to think about, but anyway. Okay, next. Back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, cheresh shenechlatz. Okay, if we have a man who's deaf, which we said is a deaf mute, and he has chalitza formed on him, what did the Mishnah say? I'm just reading the words. Okay, chalitza ta psula. This chalitza is psula. Now, again, how did we read chalitza ta psula? It disqualifies her to the other brothers, right? And to him. So, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, zo divrei Rabbi Meir. The fact that our Mishnah says chalitza ta psula is Rabbi Meir, meaning that the chalitza, just even though he's a katan, and his chalitza really isn't meaningful, but it's enough to disqualify her from doing the mitzvah of yibum with any of them. But aval chachamim omrim, but a different opinion is en chalitza katan klum. Chalitza of a katan is a totally meaningless act, just like we saw the recitation was meaningless. So there's a debate about this. Likewise, about the ketana. Ketana shechalza also, the Mishnah said, chalitza ta psula. Same thing. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, again, we're going to say the exact same thing. Zo divrei Rabbi Meir, Damar, ish katuv b'parsha. Here we're going to get his reason. It says in the Torah, ish, a man. Okay? That means he has to be a man and not a minor. Umakshin ani shala ish. And because, even though they talk about her as a yevama, we're going to assume, just like he needs to be an ish of the age of mitzvot, she also needs to be. Aval chachamim omrim ish katuv b'parsha. Isha being tola be'ktana. Doesn't say woman anywhere in the parsha. It always calls her the yevama. If it wanted to say she has to be of age, it would have called her isha, and it doesn't call her isha, so therefore not. Now, here's our lead into our story. Man chachamim. So who is this chachamim who says she doesn't have to be of age? She could even be younger, a minor. We'll see exactly what age would that be, but she could be a minor. That's Rabbi Yosi. Okay, now we're going to have a long story to see. How do we know this is Rabbi Yosi? And I think here the story is not really just trying to prove to us it's Rabbi Yosi, but trying to tell us lots of other things. It's one of those stories. Do Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi have a yatve? Okay, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, we're not up to Rabbi Yosi yet. In fact, we're not going to see Rabbi Yosi at all. We're going to see his son, Rabbi Yishmael bar Rabbi Yosi, who's going to bring the Torah of his father. And that's how we're going to know it's Rabbi Yosi. So again, this is one of those like, what's the name of the bus driver joke? So you're going to not remember anymore, but remember in your head, the reason we're bringing the story is to show that Rabbi Yosi holds that even a minor can do chalitza. So here's our story. We have two rabbis, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, are sitting in the yeshiva. They started discussion. Okay, the person who prays needs to look down at the ground. My eyes and my heart should be there at all days. Meaning you have to be thinking about this world, okay, down. No, you have to look up at God. You really need the end of this pasuk, toward God. So they're having this debate. Do you look down? Do you look up? In walks our character that we're looking for, Rabbi Yishmael bar Rabbi Yosi. He says, what are you dealing with? He said, we're praying. We're talking about prayer. Somebody must have heard their conversation, or else they told him whatever it was they were discussing, debating. He says, He says, oh, I got the resolution. My father told me this. You're supposed to look down and have your heart thinking about the heavens. Okay. So, and that way you'll fulfill both verses. Okay. That's his answer. What this has to do with anything is a good question. You can think about it. I didn't have enough time to analyze the story, but it's definitely a story that requires analysis, and I'm sure there's a lot in it. So now, Rabbi was the Rosh Yeshiva there. In the meantime, he walks into the room, gets to the yeshiva. Now, what's the response? Everybody's sitting around talking, learning. The rabbi comes in, everybody rushes to their seats. So inu davu kalile, the ones who were light on their feet and can run very quickly, yitivu betuchtai, they go to their seats. To remember, everybody had special seats in the beit midrash. It also depended on your seniority. This is very important to know for the story. Right? We've seen stories where people were in the rows and then they got pushed back rows because they weren't right. They thought they weren't smart and they put them in the back or knowledgeable. Anyway, all sorts of things, importance about the seats. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yosi, agav yukle, he was very heavy. Because he was heavy, it was hard for him to walk. So he didn't get to his seat very quickly. And he was clearly in the front of the room. Now, to get to your seat when you're in the front of the room and you're in a crowded room, he basically had to climb over the heads of other people or step over the heads of other people. Now, it's not so clear if he literally stepped on them or just passed over them in a way that wasn't exactly so respectful. So in comes some other character. His name is Avdan, okay, or Abadan, which the root of avad is to get lost, to be destroyed. Okay, this is clearly a foreshadowing of what's going to happen to him. I think his name was Abba Yudin, and because of that, they shortened it to Avdan. It was something Yudin. I think it was Abba Yudin. So they call him Avdan. Amrle Avdan. Who is this guy who thinks he's so great, who goes and steps on the heads of all the other, sanctified people? He's not very pleased with this guy. Amarle. I see you're writing this and people were sitting on the floor. It's possible. I wanted to raise here that it's definitely not exactly clear. Was he literally stepping on them, or it's possible he literally stepped on them. It's also possible that they just mean, it's like when you get on the airplane, you get in first and then the other people come in after. And there's like a way of respect for people, and you don't pass by people. It's just not appropriate. So it could be that he literally stepped on them. It could be that he didn't actually step on them, but just passed over them. Anyway, that's not such a critical element of the story. Whatever it was somewhat disrespectful. So Amar Le, Ani Yishmael Rabbi Yosi, Shabati L'moto Hami Rabbi. First, he identifies who he is. Like, I'm not a nobody. I have good yichus, right? I come from Rabbi Yosi. And I'm coming to learn Torah. Like, what are you bothering me about? Amar Le, V'chiyata Hagun L'moto Hami Rabbi. Avdan is pushing it in. Who are you? Who you think you can learn Torah with Rabbi? Amar Le, okay, each one's pulling out another line. What, you think Moshe had the rights to learn Torah with God? I mean, think about God. Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu was amazing, but God, right? You think he compared to God? Of course not. I don't compare to Rebbe either, but I'm a student. That's my whole point. Amarle, he says, what? You're comparing yourself to Moshe Rabbeinu? To which he says, Amarle, Elohimu. You think your teacher is God? First of all, he says your teacher. He's not calling him his teacher, even though he's also his teacher. But Avdan is like protective of Rebbe, and he says, it's true I'm not Moshe, but what? You're saying that your Rebbe's God? Your Rebbe's not God either. So I might not be Moshe Rabbeinu, but your rabbi's not God, so I can learn from him anyway, even if I'm not at Moshe Rabbeinu status. So they're having a big, fight here, argument. Anyway, I'm Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef pipes into the story. He's not in the story. He's much later. He's a commentator on the story. And he says, I just want to point out one thing before we get back to the story. Shakle Rebbe Lemitraf said, Rebbe got punished in the story. I know. Okay, this doesn't always happen like this in abroad. I don't know. But in Israel, teachers have a day off. Okay. And every time the teachers have a day off, everything goes crazy, right? It's like the worst day. The kids all act out because it's the teacher's job to keep things under control. Now, where was Rebbe in this whole story? He was clearly in the room. Why wasn't he keeping control? Why didn't he stop this argument? So comes Rav Yosef and he criticizes Rebbe and he says he got punished for this. What's his punishment? He called him your Rav and not my Rav. That was disrespect for Rebbe. And they're not blaming Rabbi Yishmael for being disrespectful. They're saying Rebbe deserved that because he wasn't really functioning as his Rebbe. He wasn't protecting him from Avdan, and he didn't get involved to basically, fix this problem. Which is an interesting critique about teachers saying it's your responsibility to keep order in the room. Okay, that's first. That's like an aside. Now back to the story. Adahachi, in the meanwhile, right? Stories always have in the meanwhile. Yevama remember why we were in the story? Okay, we want to know, can a yevama do chalitza, a young woman, right, before she's of age? So in walks the yevama before Rebbe. Amarle Rebbe la'Avdan. Now, Avdan was obviously his prize student, which is why Avdan was trying to protect the covet of Rebbe and getting upset with people not doing things properly in the beit midrash. So Rebbe says to Avdan, Puk bidka. It's a very strange line. go and check her to see if she's of age. Now, I assume Avdan wasn't the one who was doing the checking. Again, I'm going back to the security in the airport, right? If a woman needs a body check, they find a woman to do it, right? So I assume his job was to go find a woman who was going to check. Does she have simanim or not? Right? Very unpleasant, right? You think chalitza is unpleasant. This is also pretty unpleasant. He sends Avdan as his messenger to do this. The batar de nafek amarle Rabbi Yishmael. So after he leaves the room, I guess Rabbi Yishmael didn't want to start saying anything while he was still in the room, but he goes and he leaves the room, and Rabbi Yishmael says, "Kach amar Abba." My father said, and remember what we're looking for, that a ketana can do chalitza. He said, I don't know why you're checking her age. He says, my father said, even a woman, doesn't matter if she's young or old. Only ish has to be of age, but she can be young. Amarle. So now Rebbe goes to call Avdan back, and he says, Talot sricha kvar horezaken. We don't need you because the zaken already taught. Okay, kvar horezaken means Rabbi Yosi, the elder, had already taught. I didn't know this, but now I know that she could be under the age. So what happens? So Avdan, first of all, it's a big insult because he says, we don't need you. That's already foreshadowing of what's going to be. And then kamafsa Avdan da'ate. So now what happened? The same wording is used before. He now, remember, because he was obviously in the front of the room, he got sent out, and now he's got to climb over the, right, step on people, whether literally or not literally, but step over people in order to get to his seat. Amarle Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yosi. Now comes Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yosi with the big insult. Mi shetzarich lo am kadosh yifaseh al rashei am kadosh. The one who's needed by the people, which is me, I needed to pass on the Torah of my father and resolve this situation. And by the way, resolve her from being the embarrassment of having checked for her simanim, which is really unpleasant, is allowed to step over people in order to get to his seat. But Misha ain't sarich lo am kadosh, but you were clearly not needed. You got sent on this mission and got sent back. You're clearly not necessary. Hey, ach yifasa al rashei am kadosh. How do you have the rights to go walking on the stepping over people? Amar le Rebbe la Abdan. Now the question is, where's Rebbe going to hold here? He says to Abdan, kum biduchtech, stand where you are. Don't go back to your seat, which obviously means a lot more than don't just go and stand, walk over people, but you no longer belong in the front of the beit midrash. Maybe he was blamed somewhat for not knowing the halacha, and even though Rebbe didn't know the halacha, but I think he's really been blamed for how he treated Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yosi, who was obviously very deserving of respect. And he really started up with him. And Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yosi is not innocent in this story either, because he goes back at him. So it's a good question why they're not really blaming him at all, but it could be Avdan really started up with him, and that's really why he's blamed. So as many Talmudic stories end, Tana ba'otasha, at that moment, nitztareya Avdan, he became a leper, which, by the way, what does it do? It removes you from the community, right? Forget about being needed, right? You're out there entirely. And worse than that, tav ushne banav, two of his sons drowned, ume'anu shte kalotav, and two daughters-in-laws did miyun to their husbands and walked out the door on their husbands, okay, on his sons. Okay, pretty bad ending to the story, okay, where, again, his name, Avdan, clearly was indicating where his end was going. Now, the story ends with this last line. Thank God that God embarrassed him in this world and punished him in this world, because then at least he'll get rewarded in the next world, right? There's always this concept. If you get rid of all your sins in this world, you atone for them, you can go to the next world. Now, again, what to do with the story is a good question. I think that one element is exactly what's missing in our whole section, which is so obviously missing, is, as we talked about before, the embarrassment for the woman and for the man in this chalitza ceremony. And I think that what they're referring to here is the embarrassment and humiliation, and how important it is. It's already a humiliating ceremony, and I think they're highlighting here this concept of making sure not to humiliate people further. If you listen to what went up online on our site from Web Yeshiva of this woman who underwent chalitza, one of the things she discussed was how, because chalitza is not done often, they brought all these students to watch, and they stood around laughing and talking, and she looked at them like, how dare you speak at my ceremony like this? And that there's this very important element of having sensitivity of both the rabbis, of any people who are standing there, and that, yes, it's already, and there's nothing to do about it. You have to do, and maybe specifically in the ceremony, in the sugya where we're talking about, you have to take off the shoe. you have to spit. These are important elements. But whatever can be done without causing embarrassment should be done, because look what happens when you embarrass someone. Okay, keeping on. Amar Rabbi Ami, midvarav shel Rabbi Nomo, ketana hachaletzet bepeutot. So from the words of Rabbi, we can learn that a ketana can do chalitza from the moment she's a peutot. So they say peutot is around the age of 7. Many people explain that once she can already understand things and be involved in even a monetary, she can go to the store and buy something and understand the concept, then she can already do chalitza. Rav Amal, he disagrees. Ad shetegia le'onat nedarim, she has to be 11, which is the age when your vows are considered. The hilchata ad shetavi shtei savo. Halacha is actually she has to be of age. So even though we have this whole story proving that a young woman can do it, in the end they basically say no. Chalitza b'shnayim. We're back to the Mishnah where it talked about could you do chalitza with 2? There were 2 rabbis who said you can, and then we said ein halacha koto azug. Right? We don't paskin that. So Amar of Yosef Ram Yomi Amar of Nachman ein halacha koto azug. That's what we saw on the page before when they quoted it before the Mishnah came up. We don't paskin like the people who say it's okay to do chalitza in front of 2. And then they say, why would Rav Nachman say this? Amar of Nachman chadazim Amar of Yosef Ram Yomi Amar of Nachman. He was also quoted by the same person as having said chalitza b'shlosha. So why do you have to say we don't pass in chalitza b'shtayim, and you also say chalitza is b'shlosha? It's obvious. If we don't pass in 2, then 3. So first of all, it's not so obvious. There was 5, and we'll talk about that in a minute. They say it's 3. You need them both. Why? If you just said the halacha is not like them, that it's 2. If you say we don't pass like them, it might say, okay, ideally you shouldn't do 2, but if you did 2, it's okay. If you said, my mistake, if you said chalitza b'shlosha, we would have thought ideally 3, but if you do 2, it's okay. When he says en alacha koto azug, that means we definitely don't paskin like them at all, not even b'diavad. And if you just said that, ela ketana kama, right, then you would know it's 3. Well, havamina diavad, you would have thought that's b'diavad, but lechatchila libay chamisha. But maybe ideally you should do in front of 5, sricha. For that, they need to say no. Ideally 3. In the end, we also saw that you do 5 anyway, but that's because we just want to make sure that most people know about it. So better to do 5, but the halacha is 3. Last part for today, we're going to have 2 questions on the story of what happened in the jail. Remember, this man gave chalitza to a woman, and actually someone asked this after class yesterday. So here's your answer. I didn't know it yesterday because I didn't get this far. So this man did it with this woman in jail, and someone asked me after class, but nobody saw it. How could it be valid if nobody saw it? Who's going to know about it if he did it with her, right? It's just their word. So Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel ve'edim ro'im otam b'chutz. It must have been there were 2 witnesses outside the jail. They saw it, they looked inside, they saw this go on, and there must have been witnesses. Otherwise, it really doesn't make sense, they say. Second question, and you can start thinking about what's the relevance of this question. Is it just what really happened, or is there relevance to it? And I think there is some relevance, but needs some thinking. Did they do the chalitza outside the jail? Ubama selifnei Rabbi Akiva bebeit hasurin, and it was brought to Rabbi Akiva, who ruled on it from inside jail. If you remember, there's a whole story that he was taken to prison by the Romans. So was it when he was in jail, he ruled on it, and the jail related to him and not to the couple? And then they brought it to Rabbi Akiva. Now, did the action happen? The chalitza happened in the jail. So Amar of Yudah Marav, beit hasurin haya maaseh, ule beit hasurin ba maaseh. It was both. Okay? Both, they did it in the jail, and he ruled in the jail. Why would this be important? It's a good question. I'll leave you with some thoughts that I thought about. One is, we said you have to have a place, because it says they went to the shara. Now, if you think about what's the opposite of the shara, so where this Canaan sit, right? The opposite, where the elders sit, the opposite would be a prison, right? That's like the dungeon. Okay, it's the opposite of the gate, which is the high place. And this is like the low place. You might think it's not an appropriate place to do chalitza. So that would be irrelevant to the question. Was the chalitza, did it happen there? Or maybe the chalitza happened outside and only he ruled there. And then it's also, can you hold court there? Can you rule from prison? Right? Anyway, there's some possible interesting consequences of what happened. In the end, there's obviously none because, well, there are relevance. You can do it in the prison. You can rule in the prison. All those things in the end are according to the conclusion of the Gemara. With that, we will end our shiur for today. A lot to think about from today's daf. Have a great day, everybody.